The shortest round, the Trump ultimatum, did not bring Russia and Ukraine any closer together during the negotiations in Istanbul. Immediately after the meeting, massive bombardments of Ukrainian cities began. Another plane crash in Russia. The crashed An-24 passenger plane had almost completely exhausted its service life, but continued to fly. Under the current sanctions, there are simply no replacements for these aircraft. The absurdity is intensifying. In Russia, there are plans to punish unmarried men if they haven't been on a date for more than 3 months. They could be sent to the front. Basmani justice is on the march. What was journalist Yuri Dad convicted of, and for how long? All this and more coming up in our broadcast. In the meantime, please like this video and be sure to subscribe to the channel Ukraine Today. It's going to be interesting, I promise. So, during the strike on Kharkiv, Russian forces used the new UMVP-5 aerial munitions with a warhead weighing 250 kilograms for the first time. As a result of using these modified bombs, it is civilians who suffer the most severe consequences and injuries. According to the Kharkiv Regional Prosecutor's Office, on the 24th of July, the city was hit by 2 airstrikes from a distance of more than 100 kilometers. Russia's war against Ukraine could continue for another 10 years, practically. Until 2034, this was stated by Valery Zaluzhny. Russia continues its terror against civilian targets and peaceful residents of Ukraine. In particular, it has been striking the south of Ukraine. Once again, Odessa was at the epicenter of the attack, a multi-story building was destroyed, and the legendary Privoz market also caught fire. Ukraine is responding with strikes on enemy military infrastructure. A massive drone attack was recorded in the Krasnodar region. Powerful explosions were heard in Sochi and Adler, where an oil depot caught fire as a result of the strike. Putin's pseudo-empire is preparing a war at sea. Russia has launched large-scale naval exercises in the Pacific and Arctic Oceans, as well as in the Baltic and Caspian Seas. Find out more about all this in our military review right now.
Hot night in Russia. Drones have visited Krasnodar Krai.
Oh, Mom, that's it. Oh, that's it. Oh, what the hell?
I'll be shocked. I'll be shocked.
Sochi suffered its largest attack of the entire full-scale war. Local residents counted at least 7 explosions in the sky over Adler. About 800 passengers were stranded in airports across Siberia. The UAVs may have hit one of the railway bridges. Russian authorities also reported a strike on an oil depot on Tavrikeskaya Street. While UAVs are attacking strategic targets in Russia, in Ukraine the occupiers continue to terrorize the civilian population. Overnight, Putin's forces launched a massive strike on Odessa. As a result of the attack, civilian infrastructure, residential buildings and sites in UNESCO's zone were damaged. One of the enemy's targets was the famous Privoz market in the historic city center. But this war is not enough for Putin, and apparently the dictator is preparing for yet another one. Russia has launched large-scale naval exercises involving more than 150 ships and 15,000 servicemen in the Pacific and Arctic Oceans, as well as in the Baltic and Caspian Seas.
The scenario of the exercises involves the defense of base areas and, most importantly, areas of economic activity. In other words, the Russian Federation is making it clear that, accordingly, the Arctic is within the zone of exclusively Russian economic interests. The same situation applies to the Baltic Sea. The Russian Federation is making it clear that it will put a stop to any attempts by NATO countries' fleets to block the activities of illegal tanker vessels belonging to the so-called Shadow Fleet.
Meanwhile, Turkey is strengthening its military capabilities. The defense company Roketsan has for the first time showcased its newest hypersonic ballistic missile, the Tayfun Block 4. It is stated that it can strike targets at a range of several hundred kilometers at speeds exceeding 5 Mach.
Erdogan is therefore considering concrete steps toward an independent defense industry at this moment. This development comes against the significant backdrop of the United States' recent decision to potentially block the crucial supply of both advanced air and missile defense systems, as well as, accordingly, the highly capable F-16 and F-35 fighter jets.
Ukraine will also soon receive new weapons. The US has approved the sale of 2 military aid packages to Kyiv totaling $322 million. It is known that these will include the latest air defense systems and their maintenance, as well as Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, their repair and technical support. And while America is publicly helping Ukraine fight the occupiers, Putin continues to secretly cooperate with Xi Jinping. China is supplying Russia with drone engines through front companies, disguising them as industrial refrigeration units, Reuters reports.
After statements from the Chinese political leadership that the PRC will not allow the Russian Federation to be defeated in the war, this may indicate an expanded nature, including military technical cooperation between the military-industrial complexes of the Russian Federation and, accordingly, the PRC.
Meanwhile, fierce fighting continues on the front line. Russian forces have amassed reserves and are trying to break through to Pokrovsk. At present, fighting is taking place in the outskirts of the city.
Meanwhile, deputies of the so-called State Duma of the occupying country, Russia, are considering an initiative from activists who propose adding unmarried men to the Interior Ministry's blacklist. According to this idea, if a single man does not make attempts to start a family and does not go on dates for more than 3 months, he could be sent to forced labor or to fight at the front. According to the Ukrainian Foreign Intelligence Service, such measures are connected to the acute demographic crisis in Russia. At the same time, Russian authorities are massively involving children in work at the military-industrial complex to produce drones, which are then used in the war against Ukraine. The only way out of Russian prisons is for those sent on suicidal assaults. There is a catastrophic shortage of soldiers in the Russian army. Russian prisoners are being forced to sign contracts and sent to the front through intimidation and violence. Details are coming up right now in the report.
Russian convicts are being recruited for the war in Ukraine through brutal beatings and torture. Relatives of the prisoners themselves reported this to the publication Sibir, really on condition of anonymity. It's no secret to anyone that prisons have become a lifeline for the Russian Ministry of Defense. The practice of recruiting for private military companies was started by the now-deceased Yevgeny Prigozhin.
No one retreats and no one ever surrenders.
Journalists have calculated that he managed to recruit about 50,000 prisoners. Out of the 20,000 mercenaries who died near Bakhmut, 17,000 were former convicts. In 2023, the Federal Penitentiary Service reported that the number of prisoners that year decreased by a record 58,000 people. To ensure the flow of those willing to trade their prison bunks for the trenches didn't dry up, the Russian government stepped in and adjusted the laws to fit the needs of the Ministry of Defense. Since October 2024, it has become possible to sign a contract even at the stage of court proceedings, that is, before a verdict is delivered. This way, investigators managed not to burden the penal colonies and ensure the steady flow of participants for the meat grinder assaults.
A contract soldier from the Ra Men's.
What choose? Serve your sentence or go to war?
To serve my sentence.
The commander said you'd be going on a motorcycle. I said, how am I supposed to ride a motorcycle? The last time I rode a motorcycle was 2 or 3 years ago. He was already contacting me with the commander via WhatsApp. He said he learned while he's on the way.
I ended up here for fighting with the police. I signed the contract on the 18th of December 2024. They didn't really ask me. I signed it. Well, as they told us, they'll clear my criminal record and in a year I'll be completely free. Life will start with a clean slate. The scariest thing in war is when your own guys shoot themselves. No one knows why or what for. And the headless ones, those lying there without a head, idiots. You'd be better off serving out your sentence and not rushing anywhere. There's nothing good here, and it's not all honey and roses.
There hasn't been any more honey in the war in Ukraine, but there are fewer convicts now. The system keeps churning out political prisoners, but you can't recruit them. For a year now, the media has been reporting that it's simply impossible for inmates to get out on parole. There's only one option, a contract. And now, his relatives say they're forcing him to sign it by force.
They opened the gates and hundreds of cosmonauts stormed the colony, beating everyone indiscriminately. If you raise your hand, they accuse you of resisting. They just beat the entire colony along the spine with batons. And almost half of them, even with broken bones, were taken straight to the front. Some people signed the contracts right there, while others were taken to Moscow. And on the way, they'd say, well, when we get to Lefortovo, we'll cut your ears off. He immediately signs the contract. They communicate with each other throughout the region. Of course, this is happening in every colony in the region. Well, if even in such a relatively mild place, where every act of violence happened for some actual reason, you can imagine what goes on in the high security or special regime colonies.
Journalists report that the situation in the colonies of the Volga region is not much different from that in the Tula region.
On Friday, the FSIN, OMON, FSB, and even FSIN officers from a neighboring region arrived. About 100 people. They beat everyone indiscriminately and immediately took 15 non-Russians for the contract. Half of them were taken to Lefortovo. On the way, they threatened to charge them with extremism if they didn't sign the contract. All week, Russians have been beaten one by one. They are summoned to the authorities, their phones are taken away. If you refuse to sign the contract, they beat you. After that, squad after squad is closed down because of the prisoners who have left. There are about 10 left now.
The Russian prison has become dictator Putin's magic wand. Thousands of convicts who don't need to be paid enlistment bonuses can be easily disposed of without worrying about funeral expenses. Russian military aggression has allowed Russians not only to satisfy their imperial ambitions, but also to conveniently get rid of social deadweight.
A plane crash in Russia. A passenger plane crashed with nearly 50 people on board. This aircraft is over 50 years old. But instead of updating its fleet, the Kremlin continues to wage war with Ukraine and clash with Azerbaijan. Chinese President Xi Jinping held talks with the leadership of the European Union in Beijing. Could it be that the keys to the war in Ukraine are in China's hands, not the USA's? At the talks in Istanbul, Moscow and Kyiv did not come any closer on either a ceasefire or a possible meeting between the presidents of the two countries. Not even an ultimatum from Donald Trump, who promised Moscow tough sanctions if there was no progress by autumn, helped the situation. All the details are in our international review.
On the 23rd of July, the third round of negotiations between the Ukrainian and Russian delegations took place. There was no real breakthrough, and the meeting lasted less than an hour.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
Zelensky is ready to meet with Putin as soon as tomorrow. During the negotiations, Rustem Umerov proposed to the Russians to organize a meeting of the leaders of Ukraine, Russia, Turkey, and the United States by the end of August.
This is a standing offer that can be implemented at any time. If Putin says tomorrow, I'm ready to meet with President Zelensky will be ready to meet tomorrow. I think that's the answer to your question about the final date.
Nevertheless, the Russian side, as always, is stalling. According to Medinsky, in order to hold the meeting, the terms of the agreement need to be worked out and topics for discussion by the leaders need to be prepared. What does that even mean?
No, of course not. Such a meeting is not being planned because it needs to be thoroughly prepared since, let's say, the positions of the memorandums presented publicly by Ukraine and Russia are still too far from being synchronized. There are countless reasons, yes, that the Russian side and Putin himself find in order, of course, not to go to such a leaders' meeting and not to meet directly with the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, which is absolutely obvious.
Meanwhile, Russia continues to lose its influence. Azerbaijan has distanced itself. And now even Armenia has turned its back on Russia, organizing a bilateral meeting without the Kremlin's participation.
Do they want to take a tougher stance toward the Russian Federation? Of course they do. Do they want to be able to better protect the interests of their citizens or ethnic Azerbaijanis living in the Russian Federation? Absolutely, yes. Azerbaijan and President Aliyev personally will pursue this through their strategic partnership with Turkey and, of course, through the active development of the Silk Road, meaning the overland connection between China and Europe.
Apparently, against the backdrop of the conflict with the Azerbaijanis, the Russian authorities have effectively started a hunt even for Russians themselves. In the Chelyabinsk region, officials have declared the Russian community extremist without trial or grounds. Now people are being threatened with persecution.
I urge everyone to join the Russian community, where an atmosphere of brotherhood and mutual support prevails.
Is China really in charge of everything now? On the 23rd of July, Xi Jinping met with the presidents of the European Council and the European Commission in Beijing, supposedly to establish stability under the current circumstances.
Is China interested in having Russia serve as a big scarecrow for Europe? Yes, they are interested as well. In fact, I'll go even further. Even the United States, in the person of Trumpas, we can already see from this configuration is partially satisfied with this, because only such a fear in Europe of a direct attack, of escalation from the Russian Federation, has raised NATO membership contributions to 5%. And Europe is ready to pay for armaments, not only for itself, but also for Ukraine, thereby boosting the American economy.
Well, it's story time. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, known for her support of Trump and anti-Ukrainian statements, spread a fake story about protests in Kyiv. According to her, people supposedly took to the streets against President Zelensky.
There are mass protests taking place in Kyiv against Ukrainian President Zelensky, who is a dictator and refuses to sign a peace agreement and end the war. I thank the Ukrainian people. Remove him from office. America must stop funding and sending weapons.
Of course, the demonstrations in many Ukrainian cities have nothing to do with calls for capitulation. But for people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, it's a convenient excuse to present wishful thinking as reality. But could this fake be dangerous for Ukraine?
I think it's obvious to many, and in fact, the main intelligence directorate has officially written about this, that the Russian Federation is already preparing to use this methodology of peaceful protests for its own purposes. So will different sides use this, whether it's already created images or whether they'll create their own images tomorrow to achieve their political goals and not just political goals? Well, of course, yes. The Pandora's box has been opened.
And now, briefly about the magic of Russian politics. The other day, a State Duma deputy from United Russia managed to vote on 11 bills. And everything would be fine, except the problem is that at the same session, they officially announced his death.
The complete collapse of the Russian automotive industry. The largest passenger car manufacturer in Russia, *Avtovaz, is preparing to switch to a reduced 4-day work week. The company links this decision to unfavorable trends in the car market, a credit crisis, and dumping by imported brands, which are predominantly Chinese manufacturers. Our journalists have all the details.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
*Avtovaz, the largest Russian car manufacturer, is reducing the work week in order to survive. Starting as early as the end of September, production employees may work not the full 5 days, but 4. The main culprit in the market is China. As stated by *Avtovaz, this is an extreme measure, since high interest rates and competition from China are reducing its sales.
Naturally, it's not easy to withstand competition from the Chinese, although objectively, Chinese cars are bad. The problem is that they really are cheaper, and compared to *Avtovaz, they're not much worse. That's essentially why *Avtovaz is losing the competition.
Reuters reports that last month, *Avtovaz, which is struggling to find enough car buyers, announced that it expects a 25% drop in sales on the Russian car market this year. And the main problem it cited was the high interest rates set by the central bank, which reduced the appetite for car loans and increased production costs.
Russians have less and less money, and nowadays, far from every Russian can afford to buy a car. That's why *Avtovaz, actually there have been problems from time to time, but as we can see, these problems are now growing to such an extent that production is already starting to decline sharply.
Currently, according to Avtostat, they employ about 30,000 people. The company had already switched to a 4-day work week for 3 months in 2022, after Western sanctions led to the withdrawal of foreign car manufacturers from the market. Last year, sales of the flagship Lada car fell by more than 48%. But this is not the end yet. In the first half of this year, sales dropped by 25%.
Putin has bet everything on the war, and he has completely redirected the economy toward war. That's why his interests today are exclusively in weapons production, and nothing else interests Putin. Naturally, all civilian sectors are beginning to stagnate.
For the first time, the engineering market in Russia declined in 2022 due to sanctions. Now, the Chinese are taking over half of all car sales in Russia, whereas before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, their share was less than 10%. In his pursuit of greatness, Putin has made his people impoverished. And now, for Russians to have at least some kind of car, they have to take risks.
It's not easy for Russians to travel abroad now, right? That is to enter the European Union. Well, there are only a limited number of countries you can enter. All of this is also quite expensive. And accordingly, someone who is trying to save money and still wants a car can easily fall for a scam. Because, well, when someone really wants something, that person becomes the perfect target for scammers.
The Russian Customs Service is warning about a fraudulent scheme related to buying cars from abroad. Customs officials report that criminals deceive citizens by promising favorable terms, but in the end, people are left without both their cars and their money.
And after Russia's largest car manufacturer, Avtovaz, announced plans to move its employees to a reduced work week, the Gorky automobile plant, GADS, made a similar decision. Starting in August, the plant in Nizhny Novgorod will switch to a 4-day work week. This is a forced measure due to the crisis in the commercial vehicle market, as explained by the press service. And, of course, in Russia, all the country's troubles are blamed on foreign agents. Being against Putin's war today is considered the gravest crime beyond the border. And the Basmany justice system is still on the march. From the recent list, that's Okunin, Lazareva, and now Yuri Dud. The journalist is accused of failing to fulfill the obligations of a foreign agent, among other things. All the details are in the report.
For a long time, he stayed on the sidelines. He didn't protest, didn't campaign, didn't pick up a flag, but he also avoided direct questions. However, now there's a criminal case.
To criticize a government that makes insane decisions does not mean being against your own country.
All right.
Journalist and video blogger Yuri Dud has been arrested in absentia on charges of collecting information about Russia's military and military technical activities. The case concerns materials that, according to investigators, could have been used against the country's security.
So at that point, Zelensky says that we are the first to withdraw troops to a certain distance. If you don't withdraw, everything continues as before.
Oscar, they're in their own country.
Yes, I understand. But people are dying in that country, you know? But you have to understand something has to be done. It just can't go on like this.
So is Zelensky to blame? Or is it because the Russian army invaded someone else's way? Or is it the Russian army that's to blame for invading foreign territory, getting bogged down there, and now no one knows what to do? Maybe it's not Zelensky who's at fault, but the one who dragged the army there?
A court in Moscow has ordered 2 months of arrest. In absentia, since Dud left Russia back in the spring of 2022, his current whereabouts are unknown. However, according to some reports, he's officially wanted in Barcelona.
Well, I just can't do it the way you do, probably. I don't know, I just can't.
Can't do what? Like me?
To stand, against my own country, I can't.
Who told you that I'm standing against my own country?
The point is that the journalist had already faced administrative prosecution twice before for violating the foreign agent law, although in fact he never actually received the foreign agent status himself, and in general he always avoided labels. And here perhaps is the main thing, not anti-government, not pro-regime, just inconvenient for Russia.
This could end up
a dead-end situation.
And how could this end? Tell me. Blow everything up?
By withdrawing troops, withdrawing Russian troops from the territory, by withdrawing troops.
On what terms?
From Ukrainian territory. I'm not a politician. I would like the troops to be withdrawn. For the troops to be withdrawn from the territory of an independent state, for everyone to be removed from there, including citizens of our country and me, who are fighting there for nothing.
The following is interesting. The wording of the accusation is extremely vague. No specific information or actions are disclosed. It's impossible to understand what it's about from open sources, but the accusation is serious and in current practice potentially political. Dud is known primarily as an interviewer and documentary filmmaker. He spoke about repressions, emigration, the tragedies of the 90s, sometimes about the war cautiously, not clearly in favor, implicitly against. But in fact, sometimes even that is enough.
So what the hell is NATO expanding and expanding eastward for? That goes against the agreement. What can you say about that?
First of all, I genuinely do not fully understand why an independent and sovereign country cannot freely join whatever international organization or alliance it truly desires to join.
NATO promised not to expand.
And did Putin promise not to seize Crimea? Who was the first to start breaking agreements here anyway?
Yuri Dud himself remains silent. His YouTube channel is active, but there are no new political statements. The accusations remain without comment.